Hello everyone, welcome to the episode 2 on building a chatbot which can do custom actions. In this episode, we will use Assistance API provided by OpenAI to build the chatbot. We have already developed such chatbot which can do custom actions using the chat completion API. If you have not watched that episode, I please do suggest watch that episode before watching this episode. The link is there in the description. In this episode, first we will go through the API and see how to use that. After that, we will use that same code to develop the chatbot. At last, we'll target to build the bot where it can do custom actions on the user prompt. So let's see how to do this in action. API. First, I'll give you a walkthrough of the code step by step, explaining the important parts of this assistance API. And later, we will use the same code to build the bot. We will import the OpenAI and will create an object by passing the API key. After that, we will create an assistance object by calling the create method exposed via assistance. And for this, we'll be passing name, instructions, tools, and model. Here, name can be any valid name, and instruction is same as the system prompt which we have set for the chat completion API, which will set the context for the bot. And the third parameter here is the tools. This is same as what we have used in the chat completion API. The tools will have the object which will have type function, and the function definition remains same. Like we will have name, description parameters, and parameters again will have type, properties, all these parameters. So assistance API, the tools definition remains same as chat completion API, but we have additional two tools which we can configure in the assistance API apart from the functions. So this is about the tools, and then we will need to provide the model. Here I'm using GPT-4o mini. So once we done creating the assistance object, we need to create a thread. Thread is like we are creating like a new user session with a chatbot. So once we have a thread, we need to add a messages to that thread by passing the thread id and the user message to the message.create method. This message need to have a role and content. The role can be user or assistance, and the content is the message. Once we add the message to the thread, we need to run that thread using the create and poll method. And the output from this method is the run object. So once this run object is created, the run object will go through different status in its run life cycle. Let's see how this run life cycle looks like. So this is how the run life cycle will look like. So when we execute the create and poll method, the return object will be the run and the initial status will be queued. From the queued, it will be immediately moved to in progress, and if everything goes fine, then the status will change to complete. Let's say the status is in progress and assistant thinks that for the given user prompt we need to execute a custom function, then the status will be returned as requires underscore action. When we see the status, we need to pull the function which we need to call and the arguments from the run object, and we need to execute the function, and the response from the function should be submitted back to the tool by calling the submit tool outputs and poll method. And that method again will return the run object which will have the initial status as queued, and it will be immediately moved to in progress. And from in progress it can move to any of these status. Now we know that how the run life cycle looks like. Once the run status is completed, we can use the message.list method to list all the messages and pull the latest message. Let's say if the run status is required action, it means the GPT is suggesting to run the custom functions. For that, we need to pull the submit tools output and loop through the tool calls and pull the function names which it is suggesting and its respect to arguments, and then run those particular custom functions. And the output from those functions should be submitted back to the GPT using the submit tools output and the polls. When we are submitting, we need to make sure that we need to pass the tool ID, run ID, and the tools output, which will have the tool call ID and the output from that particular function. So these are the methods which we will be using to build the bot. Now we have some understanding about these methods. Let's use these methods to build the actual bot. Now we know that how to use the assistance API. Let's use those methods and build the actual bot. For this, I'm using the same old project which I have created for chat completion API, where we have a backend and a front end code already created. So in the backend code, I have added a new file called server with assistance.js, and I have added the assistance code in this file. So whatever we have gone through, all this code I have added here in such way that I can expose the slash chat API. So initially I'll be creating the assistance, and then whenever there is a message to this particular endpoint, I'll check if in the message there is a thread ID or not. So the very first message from the user will not have a thread ID. So I'll create that thread and then we'll add the message to the thread. Once the messages are added to the thread, I'll execute that thread by using this create and poll method. And once we have the run object, we need to check for the status. So I have added this method handle run status, which will check for the run status. If it is complete, it will return back the response from the assistant. Let's say if it is saying require action, then we have another method which will do a function call and it will submit back the response to the GPT. And once we have a new run object, again we will check the run status by calling the handle run status. So once we have the message from the assistant, we will revert back that message to the front end with the thread ID. So whenever there is a new message again from the user, this thread ID will be sent back from the UI so that we can use the same thread ID and add the messages to it. So this is how we maintain the same thread for the same user session. Now we understand that how this chat API will work. Let's make this UI up and see how it actually works. Okay, so this is how the chatbot will look like. I'm using the same chatbot which we have developed at the time of chat completion API. The more focus will be on showing how the assistant will respond rather than the chatbot. Now let's chat with assistant and see how assistant gonna respond, and any prompt which need a custom function execution, let's see it is gonna do or not. So I'll initiate the chat. Let's ask about some any company's stock. So now because this prompt need a custom action, it should call a function and then return back the response. So now we can see the response has the current value, stock value, which is coming from the APIs, custom APIs which we have added. Now let's ask some other company stock. What about Amazon? We see that assistant, the response is bit slow, unlike a chat completion API where it can quickly respond. So yeah, the response seems slow, but we got a response. So this is how we can make a custom actions using the assistance API. One interesting thing which I have observed in the OpenAI platform is in their dashboards we have something called threads, and we can see all the threads and their conversations inside the thread. So this is a thread for which we started conversation. So we can clearly see what was the user prompt and what is the assistant response for that. And one good thing is that it can also show that what is the method it has suggested to execute for the user prompt, including the arguments which it has passed. And this is the response which we have updated back to the assistant, saying that for this particular tool request, this is the response. So it has understood that, and it has conveyed to the user in a clear format. When it comes to the advantages of using Assistance API over a chat completion API, I see few advantages of using Assistance API. The first advantage I see is the conversation management. In chat completion API, we need to maintain all the user and the assistant conversation in locally, and we need to send those messages along with the new message every time so that GPT can understand the context of the chat and it can respond to the user query. Whereas in the assistance API, we don't need to maintain any conversation locally. All the messages are appended to the thread and the thread is maintained at the server level. The second advantage I see is the context window management. In chat completion API, if the conversation is growing too long and if it is not fitting the context size of the underlying model which we are using, we need to apply some strategies to make it fit. Whereas in Assistance API, we have a ways to configure how our content will automatically fit to the context size of the model. Apart from these two advantages, there are many more advantages of using Assistance API, which we will cover in our future episodes. We have seen how the chatbot is responding to the user queries by running the custom functions. Now we need to make a note that Assistance API is still in beta, so you should be cautious before considering this Assistance API for any production use case. With this, I'll close this episode. Hope you like the content. Please like, subscribe, and share for more such AI content.